Hi there, and welcome to the HE Enabled podcast. My name is Cath, my pronouns are she, they, and welcome. This is a new show dedicated to telling the stories of those in the British higher education system with disabilities and long-term health conditions. In short, I made this podcast to make everyone feel a little less alone in what can be a very difficult system for many. So today, I want to set the tone for this podcast by introducing you to my story and how my experiences of being in university shaped me for both the better and, unfortunately, sometimes for the worse. I'll begin by talking a bit about my younger days, followed by my experiences at the 2 universities I've attended for the past 5 years. After this, I'll move on to talking about why my experiences led me to set up this podcast, and close with a little bit of information about future episodes. So, without further ado, let's get to it. I want to begin this story by telling you a little bit about who I am. As I said before, my name is Cath, my pronouns are she, they, and I am a linguist by training. I also happen to have adult diagnosed ADHD from the age of 21. For now though, I want to think back to when I was younger, say 15, 16 years old. As a young person, I'd always dreamed of going to Oxford, Cambridge, or another fancy university, but I never felt like I was quite smart enough when it came to the exams. Not only was I not privately educated like other people from those universities, but I struggled with focus, time management, and in one case, completely failed to engage the GCSE to the point of failure. This was despite the fact I loved studying and kept trying to learn new systems to make things easier, but unfortunately it just wouldn't work. But I wasn't failing so badly that my attainment was really a problem. I got my GCSEs at 16 with a decent batch of B's and C's, along with that single D grade. I wasn't entirely happy with these grades. I obviously got no A's or A stars, but they were good enough to get me to my next steps. I started my A-levels a month or so after receiving these results, and I want you to remember at this point that my ADHD was still very, very undiagnosed when I was this age, which, it won't be surprising my A-levels weren't an easy point in my life either as a result. I had to repeat my first year due to illness and change the majority of my subjects in the process. I was totally lost, but still felt like I had the potential to do better than I did at GCSE. So I cracked on. I sat one of my A-levels after 2 of my 3 years and got an A in English language. Finally! I felt like I was making good progress towards my goal of getting into a top university. So much so, I figured I would try my hand at applying to the University of Cambridge. I learned so much from this process, including how to write a personal statement, how to sell yourself to universities, and how to behave in an interview. But I also learned we should not necessarily trust the systems which are there to support us. You may have remembered me mentioning that I repeated a year of sixth form due to illness. When applying to elite universities such as Cambridge, you have to provide an explanation for your break in education via an extenuating circumstances form. This is normally sent by your school and requires minimal effort from the applicant, which would have been fine if, despite my efforts, my school had sent the form or even consulted me on it. So nothing got sent out. Instead, I had to send the college interviewing me my medical forms to prove that I had been ill. Obviously, this is a deeply embarrassing and stressful experience for me, which was only compounded by the fact I was not offered a mock interview until the day I left for Cambridge. I went and completed my interviews, and I remember this bit vividly, went to the college bar and took a deep breath out. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and then the fatigue set in. I always think of this as the first time that I experienced some kind of burnout. I was absolutely exhausted for months. I was eventually rejected from Cambridge post-interview, but given the chance to reapply through the UCAS adjustment program for disadvantaged students. Fast forward to the summer of my A-levels, and my exams, as you may expect, did not go as planned. I was exhausted, and despite all of my revision, my brain was going blank during every single exam. I came out to my A-levels with grades of AAC and a C at AS, and managed to secure a place studying English Literature and Linguistics at the University of York. It's good, not quite Cambridge, but a Russell Group university nonetheless. So, now I begin with my university life. I just want to preface this entire section by saying that York is a wonderful university, and I have nothing but love and respect towards many of the people there, and my experience is by no means representative of the experiences of every single student. I started as a fresher in the autumn of 2019, right before the world kicked off and shut down for a little bit. And honestly, it was great fun. As one may expect, I spent a lot of time studying, socialising, and all around getting involved. I worked high up in student voice at the Students' Union, did some sports competitions, and ended up receiving a prestigious Laidlaw Research and Leadership Scholarship in early 2020. Despite this, I was struggling massively with writing my essays, both due to time management and a lack of practice. This came to a point where I'd end up pulling all-nighters to get my work done behind a veil of exhaustion and tears. And I felt like I was just getting it together when the world shut down. Obviously, this was the COVID pandemic. My first year exams were cancelled, and the lab work I planned for my scholarship research over the summer was moved online. I was very fortunate that I had met my current partner around the same time and was able to stay with him through the lockdowns relatively close to campus. I spent my first summer of university conducting online linguistic research instead of getting the lab experience that I wanted so badly. Nevertheless, I started my second year of university optimistic that things would get better. I then had a meltdown over an open book exam, which was so dire I had to resit in the summer. That was after the first term of my second year. I had literally no idea what was wrong with me, and looking back, this was the first time in my life that I considered I might have ADHD with some unresolved trauma sprinkled on top for good measure. Some kind of mental health, if you will. Nice base of ADHD and some good sprinkling of everything else. Anyway, the essay crises continued for a while, but I tried my best to press on. We were locked down, but I was fortunate enough to still have access to campus facilities such as the library just because I lived nearby. In hindsight, this probably saved my mental health in what would have otherwise been a very socially isolating time. I finished my second year of uni more or less unscathed, other than that resit, and spent my summer working on one of the most fulfilling projects to date. I was researching the experience of those with disabilities and long-term health conditions when accessing university in England for the first time. And this really, really opened my eyes to two things. First, most universities make a dedicated effort to provide an accessible experience for those who need it. But second, students still fall through the cracks through a lack of support, outreach, and even the social stigma of declaring a condition on an application in the first place. It was heartbreaking to research at times, but it was incredibly fulfilling work. During my research, I also decided to pursue an ADHD diagnosis for myself. Little did I know I was about to become one of those students who fell through the cracks. My final year at York was very odd. I'd become some kind of academic prodigy with a research scholarship and unexplainably mediocre grades. I was presenting my solo research at international conferences. I was completing leadership development opportunities left and right, and was finally finding my footing again after 2 long years inside. But I was still struggling immensely with my coursework with no clear explanation as to why. As part of my final year, I had to complete a dissertation. This is quite common in British universities. I had met with my supervisor for this at the start of the academic year and explained my ideas. He seemed happy with it and told me to come back to him when I had progressed. I told him to chase me if he hadn't heard back after a while, and I got my ADHD diagnosis in November 2020 and got a new support plan which insisted I have frequent contact with my tutors. I never heard from my dissertation supervisor again, and at some point a combination of rampant executive dysfunction and anxiety meant I became too terrified to reach out. I had a breakdown trying to complete my dissertation without any support because despite my best efforts and planning, I was unable to make a dent in the work count until all of my extensions were up and I was left with no choice but to submit. I was an emotional mess with barely enough energy to function. If I didn't have my partner, I'm sure I'd be in a way, way worse place than I ended up being, and I still had a breakdown. My dissertation was submitted 2,000 words under count, but I still managed to somehow finish my bachelor's with a high 2-1 grade and a leadership prize at my graduation to boot. Do not ask me how. I later found out that my breakdown and subsequent burnout was caused in part by, surprise, surprise, bureaucracy. My student support plan had been lost on its way to my tutors and was never received by my linguistics tutors for my entire degree. I was encouraged by senior staff to submit a complaint, but honestly, I was way too exhausted. And anyway, by some miracle, I had done enough to get into Oxford for my master's. I spent the next 6 months of my life trying to physically and emotionally recover from the most academically traumatizing time of my life before setting out to fulfill an old dream of mine. So, I had finally made it. I was studying at the best university in the world. When I made it to Oxford, I thought I would feel like I had conquered myself. I had defied the odds and turned from a state-educated, academically mediocre child to an intellectual joining some of the fiercest minds on this planet. I thought it would be like this. I wanted it to be like this. But I couldn't do it. I was too exhausted. I once saw a TED Talk which said it can take up to 2 years to recover from burnout. And this sadly rings very, very true to me. I spent my first term at Oxford bedbound from exhaustion. I was overwhelmed by the content of my degree simply because I did not have the energy to process it and keep up with it. I missed days out with my friends because I was not physically able to leave my bed. On top of this, my sensory world was ruined by the constant buzzing noise of the heat pumps in my room. I never knew silence. It drove me even further into my anxiety and depression because my sensory systems were just completely burnt. And maintenance never found any issue with my room, so I had no reason to move. My second term at Oxford consisted of me trying to recover my mental health. I was self-funding my master's on a near-zero budget, so my recovery methods mostly consisted of lifestyle changes and doing everything I could to automate my life. It was at this point I really researched my conditions and set up rules for living which let me dedicate less headspace for essential tasks. I went to the market that only ran 1 day a week, so I had to go out and get food. I bulk cooked 5 days at a time, and I joined the Tea Society to get out and make some friends. I later became the secretary of the Tea Society and met some of my dearest friends there, so big shout out to TSOC. And you know what? This worked. I went through the rest of my first and most of my second year at Oxford doing much better than I had been for the past few years. On the whole, Oxford was a much better experience for me. I met some fantastic people that I still hold very dear to this day, and learned so much about myself and how to live with my own brain, even if my academics had to fall to the wayside and I was still constantly exhausted to the point that I was going to CFS clinics to try and work out what was wrong with me. But you know what? I was, for the most part, happy. But unfortunately, this chapter of my life doesn't have a totally happy ending either. See, ADHD, for many aspects of it, is characterized as a learning disability. It's the reason that I had struggled so much in the past, and when a task is demanding, it can require more support than one person can give, especially myself. This means that I require well-structured teaching in order to fully understand what's going on and complete my assignments to an acceptable standards. Normally, the standard teaching provided by university is a high enough standard to be good for me to work with. Now, I can't comment much on what's happening now because this is part of an active academic investigation, but in my opinion, one of my modules did not reach the standard. This meant that I was once again scrambling to finish work in unfamiliar territory without much oversight. I lost so much time trying to finish this project that I was left scrambling to finish another. In my hurry to get one paper done, I massively underbate the essay content of another and failed not only that module, but my master's as a result. Oh, and did I mention that my student support plan had gone missing from this university as well? If I hadn't told my tutors about my condition, they would have had no idea I even required support. No one knew until my final 2 weeks at Oxford that my tutors had never received my support plan with all of my ADHD provisional. Fun. That brings us to now. At the time of recording this episode, I missed the chance to graduate with some of my best friends, and I'm struggling to find work even though I have a good job. I'm struggling to find meaningful work because I do not have my master's. I am too terrified of falling through the cracks again to apply for a doctorate, and I don't have the academic prowess at this point, especially with a fail, to get funding, though that doesn't matter if I don't have my most recent degree. There is a chance that an academic appeal will bring me the outcome that I want, but I'm not optimistic and I will probably have to reset. I am exhausted and tired of fighting for adjustments that are literally written on a piece of paper and fighting for adequate teaching where it should have existed in the first place. I shudder to think at how this experience would have been for someone less stubborn or fortunate than myself, because I had a fantastic support network and very, very good self-awareness by the time I was done with my master's. So to be honest, making this podcast is kind of selfish. I'm choosing to make it so that people like me feel less alone and show those who are thinking about their next steps that there is a path for them because we are going to forge it. University can be a scary place at the best of times, and I know that finding real, practical support can be rare. I aim for this podcast, to bring people with different disabilities and health conditions, whether they see them as disabilities or not, from across the higher education system to talk to me and tell them about themselves. Some episodes I really hope will bring messages of hope. though I am sure this will not always be the case. University is a fantastic way to explore your passions and fall deeply in love with a discipline that you could spend exploring for the rest of your life. So I hope by drawing attention to the people inside of the system, we can make being different a more normal thing to be. And as a result, get the provision that we absolutely need to thrive in higher education. So from now, I want to bring about a series of interviews with different people, and hopefully this will start next time. So join me next time for the first interview on HE Enabled. See you soon.